Good afternoon, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com. Don't forget, if you're interested, you want to be part of the action, just please comment on the Facebook Live or Periscope feed. Do want to make a couple quick announcements. Over the course of the next couple days, we'll be switching the Facebook Live view. I got another camera which we're going to be shooting from straight ahead. So if you're listening through Facebook Live, within a couple days we'll get that worked out. And I do apologize for the delay. It's been a couple weeks since we last did a show, and we're just dealing with some issues here as we're setting up the studio. And I do promise, once we get going in full swing, we're going to be talking about a lot of things. We do have a couch that's coming in pretty soon. We're going to have some in-studio guests, and obviously this is a show where we talk about baseball, sports, and unifying America. And we're going to be spending a lot of time today talking about baseball. And we do have the Nobody's Listening segment, which we'll get into in a little bit. It's going to be pretty important as we talk about life. And that's a segment of the show that I kind of do want to do kind of off the cuff, but also kind of off the record. If you were listening to the show and you're like, hey, listen, I've had enough of sports. I don't want to hear this guy talk about something that's not in relation to sports. It's a good time for you to cut out. And that'll be about 30, 40 minutes into the show where we'll do a Nobody's Listening segment. But I did want to start out today, and we're definitely going to talk a lot about baseball. So you got the trading deadline coming up. You got some deals that have been made within the last couple days. You got Zach Britton going to the Yankees. Very likely J. Happ is going to go to the Yankees as well. Teams, obviously, that are making a push this year. Teams that are looking to do something right now, want to win themselves a World Series, but most importantly, want to get themselves into the playoffs, put their best foot forward, and put themselves in the best position to win some games come October, are going to start to tweak their teams. You got teams like the Braves and the Phillies who, at this point, have made it this far and are leading the division or in second place in the National League East. You're looking at a National League East division is certainly not looking like it was expected to do once this season started. So you got every right if you're the Atlanta Braves. So you got every right if you're the Philadelphia Phillies to act like you're a legitimate contender right now. And if either one of those teams or both of those teams made some bold moves to fortify themselves as if they expect to be a playoff team, I expect to see them doing it. You do have some teams that aren't doing that well. And here's where, and if you listen to the show before, this is where I kind of, let people have it in regards to that typical assumption that if you're not a good baseball team, you're a charity to the rest of Major League Baseball. In other words, if you're a bad baseball team, you should be able to donate your players to teams that want to make an effort this year, that want to do a little bit more in 2018, as we're using a prime example, because it is this year. If you're a bad baseball team, you don't owe the rest of Major League Baseball anything. If you're the Baltimore Orioles, as you sit there 40-something games below 500, you don't owe it to the Yankees to make them better. You don't owe it to the Los Angeles Dodgers to make them better. You owe it to yourselves to put yourself in the best position going forward. So if you make a trade for Manny Machado and you get a top prospect and 4 other players that you think you'll be able to use for a guy that's going to be a free agent at the end of the season, I don't have that much of an issue with it. But if you're going to make a deal with the Yankees and kind of back down to the quote-unquote Yankee way, which I'm going to get into right now. As we talk about baseball, you look at one team in history of Major League Baseball has won 27 World Series championships starting in 1923, and in 27, 28, 32, 36, 37, 38, 39, 41, 43, 47, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 56, 58, 61, 62, 77, 78, 96, 98, 99, 2000, and 2009. They should be expected to be a favorite every single year. There's not been a team in sports history, let alone Major League Baseball history, that has dominated a sport like the New York Yankees. Now, I could go the route of being a salty non-Yankees fan, but let's be honest. There's 2 fans in the world of Major League Baseball. There's Yankees fans and there's non-Yankees fans. Some non-Yankees fans are more tolerable of the New York Yankees and their history and their team and their fans than others. Now, I, for the most part, am. I'm a very tolerable baseball fan. You know, it doesn't matter that I don't root for the Yankees. I don't wish them harm. I don't wish them to do bad. I don't get excited when I see the Yankees do bad. There's a lot of fans that root for, let's say, the Mets or the Red Sox or any other American League East team. And like I said, if you're not a Yankee fan, very likely you dislike the Yankees. But my dislike for the Yankees is very low. It's at a very low level. If they win the World Series this year, so be it. I will tell you what bothers me about the New York Yankees and their mystique and a quote-unquote Yankee way. I do believe that they have an advantage when it comes to making trades with any other team in Major League Baseball. And I used to try to think about exactly why it's the case. Exactly why do the Yankees have an advantage when it comes to making a trade? Do they have more money than other franchises? Of course, the Yankees are worth billions and billions of dollars, probably one of the most valuable franchises in all of professional sports. That, I think, works up to a certain point. But then I realized that it's not so much that. If you followed what the New York Yankees did last year, their focus was on lowering their payroll, staying below the luxury tax threshold, and not necessarily about spending the most money on the best players. They've spent the last couple of years bringing in some very good young players, some of whom they traded for, some of whom they've developed through their own system, whether it's through the draft or whether it's through international. They've done a very good job. They deserve to be in the position that they are right now. So I was thinking, what gives the New York Yankees an advantage when they're making a trade with, let's say, the Baltimore Orioles or the Toronto Blue Jays, or going back in the past when we're talking about the Chicago Cubs or the Cleveland Indians, or really anybody that they've made a deal with? Because one of the things that most Yankees trades have in common is the Yankees seem to always get the upper hand, or more times than not, they seem to get the better player. Now, it didn't work so much in the 1980s. That would probably be my one exception that I would make to the rule. You know, they traded for Steve Kemp. They traded for Ed Whitson. They traded for Ricky Henderson. Ricky Henderson was a very good player for the Yankees, but one of the things that all these deals had in common is the Yankees didn't win. And you can look back at the trades and say, hey, maybe they didn't necessarily all work out in their favor. But what bothers me about the New York Yankees and Brian Cashman making trades is he doesn't ever seem to be pushed to have to make a deal through something that he may not necessarily want to give up. It's Brian Cashman making a trade, dealing whatever it is that he could spare, whatever it is that he doesn't think is going to be an integral part of the New York Yankees going forward, and other teams saying, hey, we'll take your scraps. Now, if you're any other organization in Major League Baseball, the same rules don't apply to you. If you're going to try to get a Zach Britton, or you're trying to get a top player that could potentially be a free agent at the end of the year, may not, is going to have an integral part and be an integral part of your team going forward, you're expected to pay the cost. There's supposed to be a sticker price that's set up there that says Zach Britton is worth this. Jay Happ is worth this. The Yankees seem to be that team when it comes to the car dealership that's able to skip through their process and say, hey, here's what I have in my pocket. Here's a couple Mentos and a couple buttons with a lint on it that I could spare, and let's make a trade anyway. I still want to get the car. And I don't know if it's that Brian Cashman is a bully. I haven't heard anything that's come out through the media or come out through any other organizations, through representatives or executives that represent other teams. I don't know. I mean, every time you hear Brian Cashman talk to the media or do an interview, he seems to be very polite. He seems to be very nice. He seems to carry himself very well. He doesn't seem to be kind of a jerk. You know, some people, when they speak to you in public, you're like, hey, the guy has a sense of being a little bit of a jerk. Brian Cashman doesn't come off that way. But I don't know exactly how he is behind the scenes, how he is when he picks up the phone. Because he seems to be very controlling when it comes to these deals. He seems to be dictating the terms of these other trades that the Yankees end up making. And teams end up conceding to him. I go back to the first Aroldis Chapman trade, not the one that sent him to the Cubs, but the one that ended up bringing him from the Cincinnati Reds. And I remember trying to figure out how this trade ended up happening. And the trade that happened right before it, when he ended up taking Starlin Castro from Theo Epstein in the Chicago Cubs and gave him what? Brendan Ryan, who ended up being DFA'd 2 minutes after the trade, and Adam Warren. That was a Major League Baseball trade. If you're Theo Epstein, I understand you wanted to rid yourself of the Starlin Castro salary, which allowed for them to sign Ben Zobrist, and the Cubs won the World Series in 2016. And obviously, they ended up trading for Chapman later on. Every move that they made is worth it because they broke a curse of 108 years without winning a World Series championship. So I don't have any issue with what ended up happening, but facts are facts. The Yankees seem to deal not necessarily from a strength. We could talk about how great the Yankees farm system is and how their 1 through 10 in their farm system is right up there against anybody else's 1 through 10 in Major League Baseball. The issue I don't have with the Yankees stacking their prospects, but the fact that they can make as many trades as they want and they don't have to deal from that top list of prospects. They don't have to deal from those top 10 prospects that they have. Any other team that's making a trade for a legitimate player has to deal their number 2 prospect, their number 3 prospect, maybe even their number 1 prospect. But it doesn't apply to the New York Yankees. The Yankees are about to make a trade, if it hasn't been announced yet, to get J.A. Happ. And they're going to give up Brandon Drury. Brandon Drury is an extra. Brandon Drury is a player for the New York Yankees that they absolutely don't need. He has absolutely no value. And that bothers me. That bothers me when we're talking about a team that doesn't have to trade any of their top players. And they can deal Brandon Drury, who, by the way, has an OPS of what? 500? 400? The Yankees don't need him. And I'll tell you, that bothers me to heck. If you're any other team in Major League Baseball, you have to give up the top players in your farm system if you want to get anything of value in return. And there's one team in Major League Baseball that operates itself in a way, and I don't know if it's through bullying. I don't know if it's because of the Yankee way. I don't know if it's because of the mystique. I don't know if it's because every other team in Major League Baseball is intimidated by Brian Cashman and the New York Yankees. And you know what? I give him all the credit in the world because you know what? He gets the job done. He takes advantage of every single trade that he could possibly make, and he comes out on top. And there is no coincidence to the fact that the Yankees continue to put themselves in better positions to win year after year. There is no coincidence to the fact that the Yankees will continue to have the best farm system in all of Major League Baseball going forward because they don't have to trade from it. No team is going to ask the New York Yankees to trade one of their top prospects to get anybody. The Yankees can make a trade for Mike Trout, and Brian Cashman will somehow bully the Los Angeles Angels to thinking that, hey, there's a couple players that we don't need. Let's do the Tyler-Austin trade. Tyler Wade, and Austin Romine. That's good enough for Mike Trout. The sad thing about it is these other teams believe it. You heard the expression, and it's one of my favorite movies, Tommy Boy. But Brian Cashman could sell a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves. And it's weird because the other side just isn't seeing the shades being pulled right over their head. The Baltimore Orioles got themselves Dylan Tate. Good for them. He's a good pitching prospect. He was drafted in the first round by the Texas Rangers, was brought back in one of the deals that Brian Cashman made in 2015, when, by the way, he was fleecing organization after organization. So I don't think it's a bad thing if you're Brian Cashman and you're able to take advantage of that. But when are the other teams in Major League Baseball going to wake up? When are the other teams in Major League Baseball saying, hey, you know what, I made a couple deals with the Yankees, and none of them ever seem to work out. So maybe I should be a little tougher when it comes to making a trade. Maybe I should actually ask the New York Yankees to make a trade and deal somebody that's amongst their top prospects. And this leads me into my next point. We talk about making a trade for the sake of making a trade, because that happens a lot in baseball. We talk about these quote-unquote buyers and sellers, And every team has to declare itself, or the media has to declare every one of those teams. You're either a buyer or a seller. We talked about the Braves and the Philadelphia Phillies earlier on in the show. They're teams that have every right to want to make themselves better and should be very aggressive as the next week or so comes along and we get to the trading deadline and we get set up for the next month from July 31st to August 30th or August 31st, where you could add players. They just got to be passed through waivers. But if you're a bad team, if you're the Baltimore Orioles, if you're the New York Mets, if you are the San Diego Padres, if you're the Miami Marlins, the Cincinnati Reds, the Kansas City Royals, the Chicago White Sox, the Detroit Tigers, the Texas Rangers, the Toronto Blue Jays, amongst many other teams that have not done well this year and would be expected by people that are talking to say, hey, they're sellers. The best advice that I could give you is do what's best for your baseball team. If you think you can move a veteran player and get a quality return, and what I mean by quality return is having a player come back that you know you could picture as part of your solution going forward. You pick up a young shortstop that may be playing in AA, but you could envision him being a major league shortstop, your regular shortstop going forward. In that case, I would make that trade. You trade for a center fielder that may be in low A ball, but he was a #1 draft pick, expects to move up through your system relatively quick. And at some point, you could envision himself being your everyday center fielder. You make another trade and you deal for a starting pitcher who's in rookie ball right now, was drafted in the 2nd round by the team you ended up making a trade with. And you could envision him moving up through your system over the next couple of years. And 2 years down the road, you could envision him being your #2 starter in your rotation. All those deals are worth making. But the problem is we get pressure because of the extra technology that we have. We get pressure because the media continues to make a story every single day. You got baseball writers that obviously are employed by the people they end up working for and have to put out a post every single day. They have to share it through Twitter. They have to put it up on their company's website. And they need to get those clicks. So every day they're talking about what this team should do and that team should do. It's not up to the writers to decide what Major League Baseball teams should do. It's not up to the fans to decide what Major League Baseball teams should do. If you're a well-run organization, you're going to decide at some point what is best for your organization. And you know what? You could be 20 games under 500. You could be 30 games under 500. You could be a god-awful team going straight to hell in 2018. And you could decide that the best decision for your organization is not to make a trade at the trading deadline. In other words, you don't have to make a trade for the sake of making a trade. You don't have to. If you can't find the right deal that's going to make yourself better, if you can't find the right deal that's going to do one of what I said before in regards to improving yourself a little bit, giving yourself players that you feel down the road, even if it's not this year, a couple years down the road, these are players that are going to be regulars or expected to be regulars when it comes to improving your team going forward, then don't make the trade. Don't make a trade to appease the media. Don't make a trade to appease your fan base. Your fan base is not going to be happy because you picked up a couple scrubs of Mentos and a button with lint on it just because you made a trade. And I understand fans are upset. If you're a New York Mets fan, you got to be pretty pissed off right now. If you're a Baltimore Orioles fan, you got to be pretty pissed off right now. There's a lot of teams in baseball that if you root for, the fans, odds are right now, are going to be pretty pissed off. But you don't make them happier when you ship players to other organizations and make other organizations better. You know, when you improve the Phillies, when you improve, the Oakland Athletics like the Mets did by trading Juris Familia. You improve the Yankees by dealing Zach Britton to the Yankees when you're the Baltimore Orioles. You're making the Yankees better by giving them J.A. Happ. That's not necessarily making yourself better. You're giving players away to other teams, giving them a chance to play potentially in the postseason, given that organization a chance to improve what could have been one of its weaknesses, or makes their strength a little bit better, makes them a little bit better of a baseball team. But you got to ask yourself this question: what is it doing for your team? Is your team getting better? Is it a simple example of addition by subtraction, by simply moving that player to another team? Does that make you better? Probably not, because odds are it's a pretty good player. If it wasn't a pretty good player, a team probably wouldn't have any interest in trading for him. So it doesn't make your team better by simply moving that player. You got to make sure you get something in return that over the course of the next couple of years, the fans can believe in. You got to make sure over the course of the next couple of years that fans could look at certain players and see if they project the way they're expected to project. They're going to be on your major league roster, maybe in your team's rotation, maybe playing every day for your team. And here's the last point I'm going to make about this. If you don't have a player that can get back a return like that, you might as well just hold on to him. You don't need to trade him for the sake of making a trade. Once again, this is John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. As always, glad to be with you. We're going to be back with you tomorrow as well, as we're working on a couple things in the studio. We got the Nobody's Listening segment coming up in a little bit. The last thing I do want to talk about is we are going to talk all baseball today. We'll talk about some other sports tomorrow. We'll also do another Nobody's Listening segment. We think about baseball's Hall of Fame, a record class because of the Veterans Committee voting for Jack Morris and Alan Trammell. 6 Major League Baseball players, not only that, but 6 living, and players that played really within a lot of people's lifetimes, certainly within my lifetime, and within a lot of the listeners' lifetimes, will all be inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame this coming Sunday. So obviously, congratulations go out to Chipper Jones and Jim Thome and Vladimir Guerrero and Trevor Hoffman and Alan Trammell and Jack Morris. All players that probably deserve to be in baseball's Hall of Fame. I don't have any issue really with any of them making it. The one that I'm probably the most on the fences about is probably Morris. But he pitched. He was that different generation of pitcher. When you look at the greats that pitched in his generation, the Seavers, the Phil Niekros, the Steve Carltons, the Nolan Ryans. Morris would have the tendency to go deep into games. He would have the tendency to pitch to the score. If his team's up 10-2, he would go try to get outs. He'd throw strikes, maybe give up a couple home runs, win the game 12-5. I get that. So if there was one player that's being inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame that maybe I would dispute the most, it would be Jack Morris. But I don't have an issue with it. What I do want to talk about is Hall of Fame relievers. You have a Hall of Fame reliever that's being inducted this Sunday, and that's Trevor Hoffman. 601 saves, very good career, mostly with the San Diego Padres. You have a reliever that's going to be, perhaps the first unanimous selection when it comes to the baseball writers. Mariano Rivera will be inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame next year. And we're looking at a new precedent that's kind of been set. We look at it, the changes of the game of baseball, which is obviously not as heavily reliant on starting pitching as it used to be. It used to be pitchers were expected to complete the game that they start. Relievers came in, the Johnny Murphys and the Joe Pages of the world were in there to pitch the last couple innings if a starter needed to be pulled. And then you went into the generation of the Raleigh Fingers and the Goose Gossages, the Bruce Suters, the Dennis Eckersleys. And baseball had changed to a point where you needed a legitimate reliever to be able to win a World Series championship. Now, there were some teams that won World Series without one, or some teams won a World Series with a subpar one. But the importance of late game relief and guys that were not starters starts to apply to the Hall of Fame. And you think of Hoyt Wilhelm, who was a very good pitcher for a long time, pitched over 20 years, threw a no-hitter as a starter, was probably the first pitcher to be noticed as a legitimate Hall of Famer that primarily pitched in relief. I look at Dennis Eckersley, who obviously had a great career as a starter. What him and Hoyt Wilhelm had in common is the fact that they both threw no-hitters as starters. were both obviously inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame as relievers. So as the game has changed and we look at the top players, of the top 1% or the top 2%, we got to start to consider relief pitchers. But where do you draw the line? And here's where I have the problem. I was looking at some stats the other day, and I was looking at Trevor Hoffman, and I wanted to make my knock and say, why is Trevor Hoffman not a Hall of Famer? Well, you could say he didn't necessarily dominate in the postseason, but what he did is he was the example of consistency. And you look at the way baseball has changed, very few other pitchers have done what Trevor Hoffman has done. 9 seasons of 40 or more saves. It was pretty much a guarantee. He'd go out there, he'd pitch the 60 to 70 games, he'd get his 40 saves. He'd make the Padres a better baseball team than it would be without him. I don't have an issue with Trevor Hoffman being a baseball's Hall of Fame. I look at Eckersley, and Eckersley, what he did for the position as he took over in the late 1980s, after being a starter, a decent starter, not a dominant starter, but an okay starter, and transformed the way the game was handled at the end. I think of Goose Gossage, a guy who, along with Raleigh Fingers, were the premier stoppers in the 70s and the 1980s. In fact, Fingers for the better part of the 1970s, Gossage for the mid to late 70s to the early 80s, or the early to mid 80s. I don't have any issue with any of them being in baseball's Hall of Fame. So then I look at a player that was inducted in 1996, a pitcher that pitched for the Chicago Cubs, the St. Louis Cardinals, and the Atlanta Braves. And while I think he was a very good pitcher, he dominated in the back end of games, I don't understand why Bruce Sutter is in baseball's Hall of Fame. I look at his numbers, and he finished his career with exactly 300 saves. The dominance of his career, or the prime of his career, was in the early part of the 1980s. He missed the entire 1987 season. He only pitched 12 seasons in Major League Baseball, and not all of them were Hall of Fame level. And I know it's not fair to compare one position to another, but Albert Bell played 12 seasons in Major League Baseball and is not in Major League Baseball's Hall of Fame. His 12 seasons were a lot more Hall of Fame worthy than Bruce Sutter's were. And I'm not amongst the crowd that wants to see players taken out of Major League Baseball's Hall of Fame. But when you have a player that you can make a very eerie or unfair case to why they're in baseball's Hall of Fame, makes you start thinking about other players that were very similar or good enough or close enough to as good as said player that's already in the baseball's Hall of Fame. I look at a pitcher like Dan Quisenberry, the late Dan Quisenberry, who was as dominant, if not more dominant, than Bruce Sutter in the early part of the 1980s. Like Sutter, he won a World Series championship. His numbers were solid, but I don't look at Dan Quisenberry and say that he's a no-doubt Hall of Famer. But you understand the way that it works. When you have a player that is put in, that is track record and numbers may be considered a little bit skeptical in regards to that player's qualifications. You understand why somebody opens the door and says that players that were similar to that player should be considered as well. So my knock on baseball's Hall of Fame, and trust me, I could come up with about 8 to 10 players that are less deserving or less Hall of Fame worthy than Bruce Sutter. But I don't think there's a reliever in baseball's Hall of Fame that had less of a track record and has less of a resume than that of Bruce Sutter. So I look at Bruce Sutter, and I understand that he had some very good seasons. But if anybody's going to knock Trevor Hoffman had a more dominant career, was a lot more consistent, and contributed a lot more to the late game reliever than Bruce Sutter did. And I understand there's people that like Bruce Sutter that may say, hey, he reformed or transformed the split finger. He used a pitch that a lot of people picked up after, a pitch that wasn't being used. I'm okay with that. But then you're talking about Bruce Sutter being a pioneer as opposed to being in a Hall of Fame as a late game reliever like he is. Once again, never going to take anybody out that's been put in. But it makes my case for Trevor Hoffman. Trevor Hoffman was much more successful, much more transcending to the game, and much more dominant than Bruce Sutter was. Once again, John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Glad to be with you. As we get set to finish the show today, we're getting into the Nobody's Listening segment. So let me just cue up the music, and we're going to get into today's topic of the day. The Nobody's Listening segment of the Pass Ball Show is brought to you by johnpielli.com as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. We'll be happy to announce over the course of the next couple of weeks a couple more sponsors, which will be backing up the show and supporting the show. So I do thank them in advance. I was at the Mets game yesterday with my daughter, and we ended up getting tickets in the Coca-Cola corner, which was formerly known as the Pepsi porch. And obviously, if you're a Mets fan, you're thinking about the season kind of going to you-know-what. You want to have a good time. You want to enjoy yourself. And I kind of had this mental thought in my head. I was thinking, I'm like, hey, I'm sitting up here in the porch or the Coca-Cola corner, and every now and then a ball will hit by a left-hand batter will kind of jump right into the jet stream as the waves of the wind kind of goes from LaGuardia Airport, which is just outside the stadium, and the ball kind of picks up a trajectory, has a mind of its own, and ends up in that area. So as you're sitting up in the Coca-Cola corner, you may, over the course of the game, catch a home run ball. And then I was thinking, I was like, hey, if it's Michael Conforto or Brandon Nimmo or Asdrubal Cabrera, one of the left-hand hitters in the Mets lineup, they get it, hold the one, goes right up into the air. I take a couple steps over, I catch it in the air. And maybe I decide to take out my frustration on the New York Mets season and me being a New York Mets fan, and I turn around and I throw the ball back on the field. Well, obviously, the camera is going to pick up that home run. Obviously, my face is going to be on TV. And odds are, had I done that, had that been my protest, had I caught the ball and thrown it back on the field, even though it was a Mets home run, I would have had a video that probably would have gotten 100,000 views on it. I may have gotten a video that would have had 500,000 views on it, 1 million views, maybe even more than that. So I asked myself and say, hey, what is it that I want to be known for? Do I want to have a moment, a spontaneous moment like that, which anybody could have done, right? Anybody could have been in the Coca-Cola corner on any given game, caught a ball on the fly, tri-hopped, turned around, and flung it on the field, and they would have had their 15 minutes of fame. I don't want to be remembered for that. So whatever it is that you're doing, you ask yourself, do you want to be remembered for what you're doing now? Do you want to be remembered for something that perhaps you want to do in the future? Or would you rather be remembered for something that gives you about 15 minutes worth of fame? In other words, do you want a video to go viral where millions and millions of people see it and you're known as that person? Do you want that to be your identity? Steve Bartman doesn't want to be known as the guy that interfered or could have come close to interfering with a ball that cost the Cubs, or people think cost the Cubs, a chance to win the National League pennant in 2003. There's some bad moments that happen in the world of sports with athletes. Do you want to be known as the quarterback that fumbled the ball when Herman Edwards picked up a fumble, ended up scoring a touchdown in the last couple seconds or minutes of an Eagles-Giants game? Do you want to be known as that pitcher that gave up that home run to Dave Henderson in the American League Championship Series in 1985 with your team up 3-1? And those people's names will always be remembered. They will never be forgotten. Would you prefer to be remembered for something that is 15 minutes of fame worthy, or would you rather be remembered for a bad moment in sports history. And I think of bad moments in sports history, and one of the things that they all have in common is the fact that none of them were done deviously. None of them were done by bad people. We're not talking about criminals that end up having bad moments in sports history. I always think about that soccer player for, I believe it was Mexico or Ecuador, that ends up kicking a ball in his own goal, costing his team a game. Fans, obviously, in their fanatic and crazy, sometimes unjustifiable nature, came after him and ended up killing him. I don't necessarily want to be known for that, but I'd rather be known for giving my all. I'd rather be known for showing up every day, doing the best that I can, even if it wasn't good enough. Now, a lot of people can get a free ride when it comes for a moment. You can have a viral video. There's a bunch of people that go out of their way every day to try to create a viral video. Maybe hope that by filming random things, maybe they could film something that's never been filmed before, or film something that is interesting enough that a lot of people are going to want to see it. But it doesn't take much talent to do that. It takes being in the right place in the right time. Just like it didn't take much talent to catch a ball in the Coca-Cola corner at Citi Field, pivot, and throw the ball back on the field, even though it was a Mets home run. It doesn't take much talent. It takes being in the right place in the right time. So I think it's something to leave the show with as we get set to go off into sunset today. A lot of different things you can be remembered for. Some of them are lucky, and some of them are based off your talent. Every single one of us has been given God-given talents. Some of them are more prominent and more out in the spotlight than others. But I'd rather be known as a solid dad, a solid son, solid brother, a solid friend, a person that's willing to give you the shirt off my back, a person that's willing to give anybody, regardless of who you are, advice. Rather be known for that than just lucking out by being able to film something and have it go viral. A little recap of the show today. We talked about the Yankee Way, which applies when they're making trades. The only organization in professional sports that can make a trade for good players and not have to give up any of their top young players to go back. We talked about making a trade for the sake of making a trade, and it's my advice that exists not just to baseball, but to any sport, any team that's not having a good year. You don't have to make a trade to appease the fans. You don't have to make a trade to appease the media. You make a trade if you want to make your team better, if you want to improve. And if you're not able to do that, I suggest you not make the trade. Talked about Hall of Fame relievers, made the case against Bruce Sutter. You look at some of the dominant relievers of all time, Trevor Hoffman going in this year, Mariano Rivera going in next year. You think of Eckersley and Gossage and Fingers and Wilhelm. Bruce Sutter, who the Hall of Fame voters had no problem inducting in the Hall of Fame not too long after his career was over. I look back at his numbers. I don't think he was that dominant. I know he threw the forkball. He revolutionized the pitch. But if you want to change Bruce Sutter's plaque and say he's a Hall of Famer because he was more of a pioneer, I have no issue with that. But I could think of a couple relievers that aren't in Major League Baseball's Hall of Fame that should be in there if Bruce Sutter is. And I don't necessarily look at them as Hall of Famers. Finally, you want to have 15 minutes of fame? Or would you rather just be known for what it is that you do good? We'll be back with you tomorrow. Once again, this is the Pass Ball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com as well as St. Aloysius Church and School. Well, like I said, we'll be back with you tomorrow. Lots of things going on in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.